So I had a physician tell me that a patient died, and then another physician told me that, and that went against everything that I thought I knew. I had a girlfriend who had a friend who was a pharmaceutical sales rep, and he left that industry and became an attorney. So I was like, oh, let me give him a call, and let's talk about this. Let's see. And he said, I'll look into this. And the more he looked into it, the more ugly the story was, the more horrible it was. And
wow.
And we found out that AstraZeneca knew there was an issue with QTC prolongation and knew that when you married that with other drugs such as methadone, it could be deadly.
So before we begin today's episode, it's important to provide context around this particular conversation that we're going to have. Now, the events discussed in this episode occurred more than a decade ago, and since that time, the pharma and healthcare industries have evolved significantly, with companies across the sectors making substantial investments, especially in compliance oversight, patient safety, ethical engagement, and process improvement. And the reality is the overwhelming majority of pharma professionals working in healthcare and life sciences, medical affairs, field reimbursement, commercial, which means sales and marketing, they're really deeply committed to helping patients receive the care and therapies they need to improve their lives. At the same time, these conversations are important because when systems fail or processes go bad, they impact people and they impact patients' quality of lives, healthcare professionals' trust, and obviously ultimately health outcomes. And that's why the ACMA, the Accreditation Council for Medical Affairs, has always been committed to advancing industry standards through accredited education, board certification programs that help to ensure life science organizations are supported by highly competent, ethical, and well-trained professionals in medical affairs, on the pharma sales side, and of course with field reimbursement. So the goal of this discussion is not to revisit the past, for controversy, but really to learn from and understand the human impact behind these decisions and ultimately continue advancing a system centered on integrity, accountability, and patient care. Thank you. So for many of you out there who've been following me, I've been talking a lot about pharmaceutical sales reps, medical science liaisons. They go out there, they sell to physicians, they educate physicians. Today we have a guest who was actually a whistleblower to one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the world, challenging them on the fact that they hid data that unfortunately caused patients to die. So I'm really excited today to welcome Allison Zayas, who's going to talk to us about her experience as a pharma whistleblower. Allison, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Will. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So maybe for the audience who isn't familiar with you, maybe just kind of tell them a little bit about your background and how you got into pharmaceuticals.
I'm a Brooklyn, New York girl, and I started my career on Wall Street.
Oh, wow.
I worked at Smith Barney, which, was one of the top financial firms at the time. They're no longer in existence. And then I also worked at smaller, chop shop type of environments as well. So I got the full gamut.
And what did you do in Wall Street?
I got my 7 and my 63, so I was a licensed broker.
Oh, wow. So you were a licensed broker on Wall Street.
Yeah, I began as just an assistant, and then I realized that the real money required you to have your licenses to be able to, give quotes out to,
right,
to the clients and to be more more valued.
Yeah,
so make more money. So I was a broker. I did that for some time, and was working hard, long hours, and my husband became a pharmaceutical sales rep. So that's how I got pulled into my ex-husband now, but that's how I got pulled into the industry. And I saw that he was paid well, had tons of perks and living pretty stress-free. I mean, there's stress to meet your numbers, but outside of that, you're not watching the markets, 24/7 and looking at indicators and numbers. And it just was something I wanted to do. And I also had a bachelor's in biology. My dream had always been to become a doctor. I wound up dropping that after the MCATs. But
so originally you wanted to be a doctor.
I wanted to be a doctor. So when I, pharmaceutical sales is kind of a way to be in that field, but not really.
Yeah.
So that's how.
Well, you're talking to all these high-powered doctors. You're in that space. You're talking about the disease state. I could see that. Yeah, I mean, compared to Wall Street, it's much less stressful, I'm sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So tell me how you got in. Like, what was your first role when you first got in?
Well, getting into the pharmaceutical, sales industry is highly competitive, extremely difficult. So I started with a contract company. It was called PDI, and they had a contract from AstraZeneca. So that's how I got my foot in the door, and I had someone who believed in me, thank God, and gave me an opportunity. I found that the biggest impediment I had was they wanted that cookie cutter perfect 4-year degree in 4 years. And I was a girl who had run away at 16. I was a girl who took 10 years to get my bachelor's degree. I was a hustler, and I finally got a manager who saw that for what that was, where everyone else saw that as, oh, you know, she's not the perfect standard of what we want. And I got in there and I kicked butt. I won #1 in the whole, country with PDI, and
Wow.
3 out of the 4 companies that I've been with, I've been #1 and won awards. And the last company I left early, so I would have done that as well. When it comes to sales, I'm in there.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think for the audience, that's an important point. It wasn't like you were, a low performing sales rep or like disgruntled. You were actually doing really well, which, by the way, for those of you guys that are listening out there, to be #1 across the country in pharma is not easy. So kudos to you
Thank
on
you.
that. That's not easy. That means you're very well skilled.
President's
Yeah,
Club.
President's Club. So you got which trip did you go on? I usually send you on a trip.
It was Naples.
Oh, nice.
It's just so beautiful. I mean, they rented
Yeah.
a boat. We stayed at the Ritz-Carlton.
Yes.
By that point, I was single, so my best friend got a great trip. They took us to like a homemade safari and all this kind of stuff. And it's a great industry. It's
Yeah,
something
they treat you well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they treat you really
You get
well.
your 4 weeks vacation. You
Right.
get,
Okay, so then so walk us through. So now you're in AstraZeneca, I guess, through PDI.
Correct.
Now, were you like a contracted rep through PDI, or were you by this point, when we're coming up to the story, were you already like a kind of a full-fledged AstraZeneca employee?
So what happened was the contract with PDI ended.
Okay.
I was supposed to get a trip, but because I was #1, they wanted to do good by me, and they gave me a check for $5,000, all taxes in, which was great. I actually preferred the money.
Yeah.
So I got a check for $5,000, and we got the bad news that PDI lost the AstraZeneca contract.
Okay.
So then it was time to start applying. And I had built some relationships with the AstraZeneca reps that I had worked with, in tandem when we called on all these physicians.
Right.
And, one of them said, hey, we have an opening. And I went, prepared myself. It was a different drug, different therapeutic area, but I prepared myself very well. And I went into the interview, and the manager, who I love forever, another one that I love forever, said, we have an internal candidate that really wants this, and you have no specialty experience. So in pharma, that's a big deal to talk, to call on specialists. Yeah. You were just a contract rep for a year, but I'm going to give you a shot.
Yeah.
And I bypassed, all the reps who were in, calling on primary physicians and then trying to get into specialty. And I went into specialty rep, and I was calling on specialists, and the rest is history. So I worked with AstraZeneca several years.
Now, based on what I saw, I would imagine you're calling on psychiatrists or
Yes.
an internist too, or just psychiatrists?
Psychiatrists.
Psychiatrists mainly.
Yes.
Interesting. Wow. So, yeah, I mean, that is a big deal. So for the folks, again, that don't realize, you have regular pharmaceutical reps that are calling on your internal medicine, family medicine physicians, but then a specialty sales rep calls on only these specialists. So typically, if you're a specialty rep, you only get one drug, and that's the focus. So usually you're a lot more knowledgeable because it's only that one drug, and so you also have a close relationship to all the specialists. Okay, so just for context, so this is around what year now?
So I was with AstraZeneca from 2006 to 2010.
Okay. So again, just for context, the new pharma code had come out around that time. So the reason why I bring that up is that there had kind of been a renewed resurgence from regulatory bodies about what pharma companies were putting out there to doctors. So you were kind of like right in the thick of that between those years. Okay. So it's early 2000s. So I'm assuming you got the position as a specialty rep. Tell us about what that experience was like.
It was a great experience. I worked with excellent people who really cared about the health of people, and the mental illness therapeutic area is one that's really sad. There's a lot of suicide. There's the drugs that are out there improve, but there's really no cure, and there are a lot of side effects, especially back then for these drugs. Like Seroquel had a lot of weight gain associated with it.
Right.
So it really touched me, and I felt good about it, and I felt good about the people I was working with, and And then to your point about how things changed, when I got into the industry, they had cleaned up a lot.
Yes.
So like when my ex-husband was a rep, he'd be able to take the doctors to Broadway shows and on vacations and all kinds. And then, regulations came in, rightfully so, and cleaned things up. So when I came, it was a different era.
Yeah.
Doctors were only compensated if they were speakers or doing programs for us, as it should be.
Yeah.
So I was happy that I was also involved with something that was clean and positive.
So, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I went in 1999 to the pharmaceutical industry, and it was definitely the Wild West when I got in there. Some of the things I saw and experienced were crazy. I got in, I was like 22, 23 years old, and it was crazy. Okay. And just so that people understand, Seroquel, what was it indicated for?
Bipolar depression, mania.
Okay. So I would imagine just because of the prevalence, most people had depression probably, right? That
Yes.
were on it? Okay. All right, and we'll talk about that later in a minute. But all right, so you're on the, you're a specialty rep, you're with AstraZeneca, you're going out, you're providing the information to the physicians. When did you first start to sense something was off?
I was, my territory was Staten Island.
Okay.
And Brooklyn at the time. And I was in Staten Island, and I went to Staten Island University Hospital. And one of the doctors told me, one of my patients died while they were on Seroquel and methadone. And they had a methadone clinic there. There was a methadone clinic in Brooklyn. So I frequented methadone clinics. Seroquel is a drug that it does have its good uses, but it kind of, drug addicts like it. They say it quells them, as Seroquel, like it makes them feel easy and, a certain buzz they get off of it. So it's used often in combination with methadone. And for your listeners who don't know what methadone is used for, it's really a drug that helps people get off of drugs like heroin, correct? It's like
Yeah, it helps you to wean off of heroin, basically.
Exactly, and then they get on that, and unfortunately, a lot of people just stay on that.
Right.
So that with the combination of Seroquel. So I had a physician tell me that a patient died, and then another physician told me that, and that went against everything that I thought I knew, because we were told we did not have drug-to-drug interactions with any of that. So you'll explain better QTC prolongation, but I brought that information. The pharmaceutical sales industry is really regulated and really good about, if you receive from a doctor a complaint about something happening, you submit that. It's actually the rule. You can get fired if you don't. You submit a professional inquiry stating, hey, this doctor said this and I did that. And normally we'd get a response within 48 hours. And a week passed, 2 weeks passed, and it's crickets. And I'm like, this is strange. And then, I had a girlfriend who had a friend who was a pharmaceutical sales rep, and he left that industry and became an attorney. So I was like, oh, let me give him a call, and let's talk about this. Let's see. And he said, I'll look into this. And the more he looked into it, the more ugly the story was, the more horrible it was. And
wow.
And we found out that AstraZeneca knew there was an issue with QTC prolongation and knew that when you married that with other drugs such as methadone, it could be deadly. And they did not tell us that. And to add to, the horribleness of this, there was a drug out at the time by Pfizer called Gilead.
Right.
And Gilead, in their label, said it causes QTC prolongation. So I would, as well as other reps, go into offices and say, hey, doc, our drug doesn't cause QTC prolongation.
Right.
This is what you should write for your patients.
Yeah, because that was Gilead
methadone.
was your competitor.
Yes,
right.
They were our competitor.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, in the European Union, in the EU, this label warning was there for years. So AstraZeneca was well aware. Other countries had this protection that we here in America did not have. And we can get into the FDA because they're no friend of mine if you want to further. But it was pretty messed up.
That's really interesting. I have so many questions. So just so that people understand, in Europe, the regulatory body there is the European Medicines Agency, which is analogous to the FDA. And the EMA put that in the label. And it's odd because usually the EMA would follow the FDA's lead, but it sounds like they didn't. FDA didn't include it. Now, I have a question though. You have this one incident. You went to the attorney after just the one incident?
There were two things that bothered me. My case is twofold. Also, they had us selling off-label, and I realized that we weren't supposed to. So what that means is if our label is just our indication, our package insert is just for, say, bipolar depression and mania, why am I calling on child psychiatrists? We don't have an indication for that drug for pediatrics. Why am I calling on neurologists?
Did your managers tell you to go out? Like, was that part of your call?
Absolutely. You have a list of doctors, and that's what you stick to. You're
So
not
they were
going to,
aware.
very well aware. We had a list of neurologists. I called on Maimonides Neurology. You don't call on physicians that are not on your list because you're not getting paid off their scripts. Unless some companies do where you paid off a zip code, but a lot of companies do where you're paid off the prescriber's data.
But you were incentivized as a sales
Absolutely.
rep for the pediatric indicate. Wow, and you had no indication.
And at first you're like, okay, because the way it was explained to us is that physicians are very wise. Off-label writing is very prevalent. It's common, and you trust a doctor to do that. And then as you learn, you're not really supposed to be doing that. And
well, the thing is this, so that the audience understands, and I've talked about this in other videos. Again, an off-label prescription is where a doctor is writing for the drug in an area where it's not indicated by the package insert or the prescribing information. So a great example might be if a drug is indicated for diabetes, doesn't have an indication for obesity. Actually was a real-life example until recently. And the doctor decides to write it for obesity, even though it's not indicated for obesity. Now, to be clear, legally, the doctor can do that. Matter of fact, over half of the time, doctors write off label. So that's not uncommon. What is a big no-no, though, is that the pharmaceutical company cannot proactively push for off-label use of a drug. Although, again, like we've talked about, medical science liaisons, medical information, they can reply is in terms of an unsolicited request for information, and they can provide off-label information, but it has to be unsolicited. So again, just to kind of make sure we set the record straight. Okay, so let's take it from the point of you've gone to the attorney. So now you've gone to the attorney, and he looks into this and finds there's more cases, I'm assuming.
At first he was hesitant because he was a solo attorney, and people think that, like ambulance chasing, very easy. No, to go against a corporation that has a general counsel and has millions and billions of dollars to go against you. It takes, an attorney that's doing this on his own time, right? Most attorneys would be like, I don't want to touch this at first. But he did some investigating. He was able to look at the other package inserts from other countries. He was able to get his hands on studies. He was able to get a law firm to support him. And this case took 8 years. This was 2010 to 2018. This was a long time. And unfortunately, the more we uncovered, the more we didn't like it. Like, for example, association and causation are two different things, right? So you have to be able to prove causation.
Right.
So I have to be careful what I say. But as far as association, he pulled like coroner's reports from across the country. And we would find in case after case after case, like the number was like in LA County, 83 people died while they had the cocktail of Seroquel and methadone on board.
Wow.
So many people, when we look at methadone and what was a secondary drug, it was always Seroquel. It was like 80, 90% Seroquel. But you can't prove that's what caused it. A lot of these people were drug addicts. They had other issues. They were methadone, they would taking methadone at higher doses than they should have. But there was definitely something there that was being swept under the rug. And at the end of the day, it's about money. And Seroquel was $1 billion drug. And then Seroquel XL, the extended release. And somewhere someone, does the math and says, hey, let's see how long we can get away with this. Maybe it'll never be noticed. Maybe it will. We'll write a little check. In this case, they wrote a check for $90 million, swept it under the rug. And that bothered me for a long time, that no one went to jail, that this was a conscious decision that some people, maybe some men in a room somewhere, made to not share this with the FDA and leave a lot of Americans blind.
So other than the data that your attorney found from the coroner's reports, Did AstraZeneca have internal data that it's shown?
Absolutely. There was a Eulinger study that came out in 2007, and the recommendation was to measure seroquel effects on methadone, and AstraZeneca never followed up with another study, but that recommendation was based off what they were seeing. And then in 2006, we spoke about the EU. That's when they decided to put a warning. It was some Dutch reporting or something, and they decided to put a warning. And
So
then
in Europe, the EMA made them change the label.
I can't say it's EMA. I don't know. You
Yeah.
know better than I do. But the label was definitely different in Europe than it was in America.
Mm.
So prior to 2010, there was no QTC warning at all. And then in 2010, AstraZeneca voluntarily added caution to the label. And then in June of 2011, FDA forced them to change that to should be avoided. And those words are very different, very important in medicine. When a pharmacist gets a prescription, it'll flag for them, this should be caution or this should be avoided. And it should be avoided, obviously, is pretty important.
It's stronger language.
Exactly.
And again, for the audience that's not familiar, when we're talking about QT prolongation or the QT interval, what Allison's referring to is the fact that there's a delay or prolongation in the heart's electrical cycle. And the issue with that is that when you have a delay, it can cause a lot of symptoms, the least of which is faintness or dizziness, but the worst could be sudden cardiac death. And that's obviously very serious when that happens, right? The heart can't conduct a heartbeat basically properly, it quivers, and the patient dies. Okay, so this is a very serious issue. Okay, so walk us through what happened. So now the attorneys collected all this information, you got all this coroner's report. Tell us the moment you guys now go to AstraZeneca. Like, how does that all happen?
We were going to AstraZeneca constantly, and we were having a hard time. I am not a fan of the FDA. FDA was embarrassed. They had dropped the ball. AstraZeneca had failed to provide them information that they should have. And we were thinking they would be on our side. They would be on the side of the American people. They would be seen on public, shaming, or shaming is not the right word, but, going against AstraZeneca for this. On top of that, AstraZeneca was, like spanked on the hand for other stuff. So they had a corporate integrity agreement, a CIA going on. Mm-hmm. So this is like, while you're on timeout, you're doing more stuff kind of thing, and we thought the FDA would be supportive, and they were not. They were saying we had no legs. Our case had no legs and not supportive at all. And we shopped the case. And finally, it was in Texas. Greg Abbott, who became the governor, Ken Paxton, people who have very different views than I do on life. Like, they could not be more extremely different than I am. Were brought that had the cojones to bring this case, to settle. So what happened is they didn't focus on the QTC part. They focused on the off-label part. And to do business in Texas, you have to kind of sign some agreement that states that you're not going to commit fraud. And if you do, every penny that you made during that time, you have to give back. So they were able to prove that, I had lists. It was black and white. Lists of calling neurologists, lists of calling child psychs, lists of everything. And these are not lists I made. These are lists that corporate puts out, and they once they start digging, they found so much. So they sued AstraZeneca, and they settled on $90 million, of which I got a relator fee off of that. They didn't go with the QTC prolongation, not permitted to talk about what happened on that end. But that's what happened.
The off-label would have been easier. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, when all this happened, were you at AstraZeneca at this time, or like when did when were you an employee at AstraZeneca when they knew that you were basically blew the lid, or like what happened during this time? What would that have been like, right? If you're at AstraZeneca and your manager knows you're doing this, like I'm trying to, I guess, put together the timeline.
It was a scary time for me, but I would encourage any listeners, I answer to a higher power. So, and I was angry that you did this to me. You have me selling something that's, killing people.
Yeah, of course.
And I'll get into that, but I also just want to add, the hospital then about-faced, and I'm not mad at them. They were like, "Oh, we don't know anything about this," but by that time, I had it, I had submitted a report, and I'm proud of what I did. So I was working at AstraZeneca, and the days would come, and I would be like, "When are they going to find out? What's happening now?" And I was, pretty nervous working there, but I knew that they couldn't fire me because of that, right? You're not allowed, they can't retaliate like that.
Right.
So I just continued working there. And then we have corporate meetings quite often. And I saw corporate and I was just really nervous. And I was like, I got to get out of here. So I applied with another company, Sanofi Pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
They were also great. I mean, great people. And used my married name, just trying to see if it would work. And I got hired. I guess, it wasn't public yet. This was still on the wraps and going through court. And I worked at Sanofi several years. So yeah, I left AstraZeneca. I was uncomfortable about what happened. And then I was also scared about how I looked. And then I know it's a ridiculous fear, but I had a fear like, they're about to pay millions. What if somebody takes me out? Like what if, and my,
like you
attorney.
fear for your life.
Yeah. Like when you watch the movie about the guy who blew the whistle on cigarettes. Did you see that one? And then they were.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm about to cost this company millions. And my attorney was like, it's not like that, Allison. Don't worry. He's like, it's not a family-owned business. This is a corporation. They have a team of lawyers. Their lawyers probably love this because they'll get overtime, out the quotas. It gives them another case.
Would say that and think about that.
So
Okay.
their general counsel will get started on it, and no one's coming after you. The CEO will change. The shareholders don't care. The stock will go up or down a few dollars, and it's back to normal. So stop being so scared.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we think of 90 million, it sounds like a lot of money, but pharmaceutical companies, I was saying this the other day to somebody, one of the big pharma companies, they have 13 billion in cash in the bank. So, in retrospect, right, if you're looking at 90 million, it's not that much money. Okay, so you end up going to Sanofi, and it sounds like the case settled and everybody kind of goes upon their merry way. But what did AstraZeneca do for those families? So, like, I'm sure with the opioid crisis 7-8 years ago, some of the state attorney generals who went after the pharmaceutical companies, they said you need to pay the families for the damages. Did AstraZeneca, give the money to the family members that died, or you don't know? Or
I know the answer is zero, zilch, nada. They got away with it, and part of the reason is it's so hard to prove.
Were you able to figure out, or do we know where the decision came from to hide that data?
Like names?
Positions. I wouldn't want you to mention names, but maybe
It
positions.
would be I don't know what the title would be, but it would be the highest people in the highest parts of AZ that dealt with looking at all these studies and
like in a clinical medical side.
this, and it was big. It wasn't something
Yeah.
the little guy thought about.
No, I hear you. Yeah,
There were conversations about it, Will. There were conversations about let's hide this. It was that bad.
But see, this drives me crazy when I hear a story like this, and it's not that long ago, right? Because, and the listeners know this, I talk a lot about why it's so important that we have some type of accreditation for the people that work in clinical, medical, the salespeople, because in the end of the day, those people, they have to be held to some kind of external standard. I'm a big believer in that. I mean, as you may or may not know, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for a very, very long time, and I saw things like this. I wasn't involved to the degree you were, but I was at Merck when the Vioxx lid blew. I don't know if you know Vioxx. This is a drug that was for osteoarthritis, and the pharma companies were telling reps to promote it for acute pain. I never had done that, but this is what some of the managers were doing. Same thing. It was being used for off-label for acute pain for more than 5 days or whatever the indication was. But it was the same thing. Merck hid the data, and then people ended up dying from heart attacks and strokes. But this just gets under my skin because right now in the United States, we've seen so many examples like this. The Pfizer Neurontin case not long ago and other examples. And it's like, if you're as an industry, it makes perfect sense to say, you know what, we want to make sure that everybody is functioning at the highest standard, and it's a uniform standard. And to me, it's common sense. And the fact that people who are clinical or medical are hiding that data, that's even worse. And I'm not saying, if you're on the marketing or sales side, you get a free pass, but as a scientist myself, there's a level of ethics and integrity, especially when it comes to data, that you should uphold. And so it's terrible when I hear you say that.
I agree with you, Will. You're preaching to the choir. I agree with you. I lost so much sleep over those years, as my attorney did. And I just want to give a shout out to my attorney. He is amazing. He's a beast. Jim Pepper is a beast. He held on to this case when many other attorneys would have been overwhelmed. The FDA just like,
is when we would go to solo practice?
He is. He's in Pennsylvania.
Good for him. He was able to take on AstraZeneca.
8 years. He went through, he worked at 3 different firms during those 8 years, and he just kept on. And the FDA not supporting us made it that much harder, and made U.S. attorneys, maybe a little more hesitant. He was tenacious, and he was tireless, and we both lost so much sleep. Like, I blame prosecutors, because big corporate, people who make these decisions, no, they're going to get away with it. Their company's going to write a check. Why are they allowed to just write a check?
Yeah.
Why in any of these cases, like I don't know, so many different cases. Why aren't these people having to go to jail? They make decisions based on money. Mm-hmm. I think you probably know more than me.
Yeah, I think your point though is that people should be held personally liable. Maybe again, see, that's the thing, and that's the same thing what happened in the opioid crisis. Like, I remember one story really well where there was a manager at one big pharma company. He was bribing doctors so they could write the opioids, and it was a kickback. He did get terminated from that company, but there was no external body overlooking this, right? Like an ACMA. And then what happened was he went to another company selling the same thing, and he did the same thing. So it's like whatever happened to him, he probably just got terminated. But if you were, you were involved potentially, to your point about causation and, providing information that could have caused someone's death or injury, you should be held liable for that to some degree, is my opinion. And maybe,
it's outrageous. It's outrageous that no one is. No one goes to jail for these things, you know?
But I want to just put in context for everybody, because I don't want to, look, if you've watched my podcast, you guys know I am pro-pharmaceutical industry, in the sense that the pharmaceutical industry, by and large, is a lot of good things. And most people who are working in the industry, they're doing good things. They mean well. Most people aren't trying to hurt people. And so I just want to put that out there, because I think, I deal with, at the ACMA, we deal with over 1,000 pharmaceutical companies. And by and large, the people we work with, they're good people. They're trying to actually help patients get access to medications. So, matter of fact, a lot of the pharma companies, they have whole teams, they call them field reimbursement teams, dedicated to that. But there's some bad apples, like you mentioned. And that's really what we're talking about here, these small percentage of people that have, nefarious intent.
I would like to agree with that 100%. I work with so many good people, and so many, with PDI, with AstraZeneca, then Sanofi, then Otsuka. After the Sanofi, I worked with Otsuka, and I work with people who care about saving people's lives and get up every morning with how we're going to help, and all these researchers, and like you said, all these people in corporate trying to help patients get their medications. It's a really good group of people. This was the exception, and unfortunately, there are these exceptions. But the reps I work with, I have nothing but great things to say about them. I was proud of my work. I was proud of getting up and going into doctors' offices and telling them about my drug and sharing studies, and I felt good about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think that if there was some type of accreditation or certification for the reps, that could have helped to elevate a standard for them so that they were held more accountable? Do you think that might have helped, or for the people that worked in the industry?
I don't think it could have helped the reps, because we had no idea that we were.
But what about like internally, like for the leaders or for anybody that was, so that if they were held to some other standard and they were monitored for that behavior, like where they were, if they didn't, if they did what you were saying, hiding data, for example, they would get terminated.
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely great.
Yeah. Because it might have changed things, If you think about it, in other professions, it's what we do. If you're a doctor and you violate, something related to the board or whatever, you lose your license, right? So it's kind of all right. So you worked at Sanofi, you went to Otsuka. What was the last role you had in the pharma industry? What year was that?
The last year was 2018, and I was with Sanofian. So I was Sanofian, Otsuka, and then Sanofian.
Oh, you went back to Sanofian. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you left, not that long ago. It's been a few
2018.
years. And so tell us since then, what's happened to your life and what you've been doing.
So as I mentioned, I got a relator, fee, which was great. Helped me and my family very much, and took some time off, and then decided to help with politics. I won't get political on your show, but I
Okay.
felt alarmed about things that are going on. So I applied for a position with a congressman he represented Harlem and Washington Heights.
Okay.
And I worked for him as a scheduler. I started like a lowly bottom position, not to say lowly, that doesn't sound right, but just an entry level position. And then worked my way up to deputy chief of staff.
Nice.
And that was quick. I got to brag on that one. That was within a year. He saw
Wow.
that I was,
That's impressive. Yeah.
very overqualified to just do scheduling, and
Yeah.
and became his deputy chief of staff for a while. And then I joined the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. So I was director of operations there, and then later senior advisor. So I was
Oh, wow.
working in D.C. off and on for about 5 years, living both in D.C. and New York, and going back and forth. And then I left in March of last year. I just could not deal with it anymore. I could not deal with the craziness and trying to respond to every idiotic thing that happens. So I decided to leave, left on great terms, left the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which is, for people who don't know, it's a caucus of I think right now it's like 43 members who are Democrat or Latino who work together on causes. And decided to start a podcast.
Yes, I saw that. Tell us about your podcast.
So it's called From the Tunnel to the Hill. The Tunnel is like a hip hop mecca for people in the early 90s. Like,
You a hip hop fan?
yeah, I grew up during that time.
Who's
I
your
grew up in the
favorite hip hop
70s.
artist?
It was B.I.G.
Oh, okay.
Notorious B.I.G. Rest in
Yeah.
peace.
Yeah.
So the Tunnel was the mecca, and when you talk about the Tunnel, anyone who's of that age group in New York knows what you're talking about. Kind of like the Studio 54 or the
Yeah,
Palladium
yeah.
for other people. So I talk about those stories. Like my last guest was Eric Sermon, that's coming out from EPMD. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's a big hip hop group back in the 90s. And then it's called From the Tunnel to the Hill because I go to politics because, Capitol Hill and everything going on, because just focusing on that and not real world things is not, not helping anyone, basically. So that's why I call it From the Tunnel to the Hill. And I
I
launched
like that.
it
It's creative.
2 months ago, and it's doing well. Not as well as your podcast, but it's getting there.
Do you think all this stuff that you experienced in pharma kind of opened your eyes to a lot of the politics that are going on? Is that what maybe led you to do that?
Absolutely, but I always had an interest in politics. My dad ran for Congress in 2000 and lost.
Really?
Rest
Where?
in peace, Daddy. He ran in the Bronx.
Wow.
And I wouldn't even say he lost fair and square. There was just so much dirty dynamics behind it, and so
Right.
I knew how
Oh, so you
politics
were
could
exposed
be,
to
and,
it.
and I was, my dad was an
Oh.
attorney. My dad was a Air Force and then police officer, then attorney, then judge. So my dad was a man that I had a great respect for, and politics was important to him. He lived a life of wanting to help people.
Yeah, rest in
And
peace.
thank you. And I'll just add, the other thing I do is I work on criminal justice matters. So I've helped with 4 people who had life sentences, kingpin sentences for selling drugs, get out so far. So not saying that people who sell drugs should not be punished. They should be punished and punished severely. But my own personal belief is 25 years, 30 years is enough. When we're giving people life, who don't necessarily have a murder on them, like no gun. Not saying that drugs don't cause murder and drugs don't cause, but I'm just,
Right.
getting arrested selling drugs, to me, especially if you're 20 years old, should not mean life. And that's what we're looking at.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I see what you're saying.
I do a lot with that. And
Like the rehabilitation of the prisoner, giving them an opportunity to get out. They've changed.
murderers
versus-
get less. You
Yeah,
can, God
yeah.
forbid, kill somebody and get out in 20 years. And we have
Well,
people get
the
life
other day,
sentences.
it's funny you say that. The other day on social media, I came across a video where It was, basically a prisoner. The guy was like, I don't know, 80 years old. And they're like, now you're free to go. You can leave. And he was like, I've been in here since I was 20. He's like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I get out. It was really sad. I mean, it actually, emotionally impacted me because you could see the guy. He said, I don't have any family. I don't know what I'm going to
That
do. I
makes
don't
you
know how
want
to
to cry.
function.
Right?
Yeah, it makes you want to cry. It was tough, and it makes you really like think about the prison system. Is it really there to help you rehabilitate and change, or is it just completely punitive and they don't care about that? Because and then there's obviously the whole thing about the prejudice against certain groups of people, given, sometimes I know there was a documentary I saw recently on Netflix, I think it was, around a corrupt judge who was giving higher sentences to people who are African American or Hispanic and lower sentences for the same crime to people who are Caucasian. And, it makes you wonder what's going on there.
Yeah, the data is overwhelming and it's clear
Yeah.
that the sentencing is not fair. And the other thing that makes it unfair is your affordability to have a good attorney represent you, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the amount of people, thousands and thousands of people who've been over-sentenced, and very little is being done about it, by either party. If you don't have the big bucks to get pardoned, for many, you're stuck in there. So
Yeah, no, look, I mean, when it comes to that, I can see that. I really can. I can definitely see that. How can people get in contact with you?
my Instagram is Allison Zayas, so at Allison Zayas, and also my podcast, From the Tunnel to the Hill. So either of those ways work.
Okay, very good. We'll make sure we put it in the link below in the video.
Thank you.
Allison, it was a real pleasure getting to know you. Fascinating story. And thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.